On the morning of September 14th, 2016, at precisely 6:43 a.m., a convoy of black SUVs pulled onto Birch Hill Court in Old Westbury, New York. Inside number 6, Victoria Gotti was asleep in the master bedroom of her 7,000 square foot brick and marble mansion. She had no idea that 30 federal agents wearing tactical gear were surrounding her property. The FBI had coordinated the raid with military precision, and within minutes, they were battering down the ornate double doors that opened into a foyer featuring a grand spiral staircase with gold-trimmed railings. This wasn't just any raid. This was the culmination of a years-long tax fraud investigation into Victoria's 3 sons, and the feds were convinced they'd find evidence hidden somewhere in this $3.2 million estate. What they discovered that day would mark the beginning of the end for a mansion that had once been the glittering centerpiece of reality television, a property that embodied everything excessive and doomed about America's brief fascination with mob royalty. The house itself told a story of ambition, delusion, and the impossible weight of a notorious last name. Victoria Gotti, daughter of John Dapper Don. Gotti, the most famous mob boss in American history, had purchased this 4-acre plot of land in 1989 with her then-husband Carmine Agnello for just $175,000. At the time, it was nothing but dirt and overgrown brush in a quiet corner of Long Island's Gold Coast, where old money had been building estates since the Gatsby era. Victoria and Carmine were not old money, they were mob money, and they intended to build something that announced their arrival into respectable society. Construction began in 1993, though some records indicate major work continued through 1996, transforming the vacant lot into a sprawling compound that looked like a suburban palace had mated with a nightclub. The final cost of construction has never been publicly confirmed, but real estate experts estimated Victoria poured between $1.5 and $2 million into building and furnishing the property. Where did that money come from? The feds had their theories. Carmine Agnello ran a scrap metal and auto parts business in Queens, a legitimate enterprise on paper. In reality, federal prosecutors would later prove it was a racketeering operation that involved extortion, arson, stolen cars, and tax fraud on a breathtaking scale. Agnello wasn't just some civilian who happened to marry into the Gotti family in 1984. He was a made member of the Gambino crime family himself, a soldier who worked directly under John Gotti Jr. during the family's most profitable years. By the early 90s, Agnello's scrapyards were generating millions of dollars annually, much of it through illegal means. Competitors who refused to sell their businesses found their properties mysteriously catching fire. Stolen luxury cars would be crushed and sold as scrap metal, with the vehicle identification numbers carefully removed. The IRS estimated Agnello evaded taxes on more than $10 million in income between 1985 and 1999, and all that dirty money needed somewhere to go. A significant portion went into the old Westbury mansion, a monument to excess that Victoria designed to be her sanctuary from the chaos that defined her father's world. John Gotti Sr. had become boss of the Gambino family in 1985, after orchestrating the murder of his predecessor, Paul Castellano, outside Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan. By the early 90s, Gotti was the most famous gangster in America, regularly appearing on magazine covers, attracting crowds wherever he went, and earning the nickname Teflon Don, because charges never seemed to stick. Federal prosecutors estimated Gotti's annual income during his reign as boss ranged between $5 and $12 million. His underboss, Salvatore Sammy the Bull Gravano, later testified that Gotti personally received no less than $5 million per year from the family's criminal activities, which included murder, extortion, loan sharking, illegal gambling, hijacking, and construction industry racketeering. Victoria grew up immersed in this world, watching her father rise from poverty in the South Bronx to become a multimillionaire who wore $2,000 suits and commanded absolute loyalty from hundreds of men. She inherited his love of attention and his inability to live quietly. The old Westbury mansion would become her stage. Victoria had always been different from her brothers. While John Gotti Jr. followed their father into the family business, becoming acting boss of the Gambinos after his father's 1992 conviction, Victoria pursued writing. She published romance novels and mystery books, and for years worked as a columnist for the New York Post, writing about her life with a mixture of defensiveness and pride. She insisted the Gotti family were victims of government persecution, that her father was simply a businessman who the FBI targeted because of prejudice against Italian Americans. It was a narrative that required Olympic-level mental gymnastics to maintain, but Victoria committed to it fully. The mansion was part of that narrative. It wasn't a mob house. It was a successful author's home, a place where she could raise her 3 sons away from the tabloid circus. Except the mansion itself made that impossible. Every detail screamed new money, trying desperately to look like old money and failing spectacularly. The exterior featured white brick and marble columns that were meant to evoke classical elegance, but instead looked like a Mediterranean restaurant had been scaled up to residential size. Inside, the design aesthetic could best be described as Atlantic City Casino meets Long Island wedding venue. Marble floors ran throughout the first level, polished to a mirror shine that required a full-time housekeeper to maintain. Gold-trimmed chandeliers hung in every major room, including 3 separate dining areas designed for entertaining on different scales. The master bedroom occupied an entire wing on the second floor and included a sitting room, a walk-in closet the size of most people's bedrooms, and a bathroom featuring a marble bathtub that reportedly cost $80,000 to install. Victoria's taste leaned heavily toward ornate, with carved wood paneling, tufted velvet furniture, and enough mirrors to make Versailles jealous. Critics called it gaudy. Victoria called it glamorous. The truth was, somewhere in between, a house designed by someone who had grown up poor and never quite learned the art of restraint. But the real attractions were outside. The property encompassed 4 acres of manicured lawns, mature trees, and enough structures to constitute a small resort. A 3-story guest house sat near the pool, larger than many people's primary residences, featuring its own full kitchen, 3 bedrooms, and a media room with a projection screen. The pool itself was a multi-level engineering marvel that cost over $300,000 to construct. It featured a swim-up bar with submerged stools, a separate jacuzzi that could seat 12 people, and a rock waterfall that ran continuously, the sound of cascading water audible from every part of the backyard. A basketball court sat beyond the pool, though it would eventually become overgrown with weeds after the family abandoned the property. Tennis court, horse stable with room for 6 animals, though Victoria never actually kept horses, claiming her sons had lost interest. A detached garage that could house 6 vehicles, usually filled with her collection of luxury cars. And tucked behind a false bookshelf in the guest house, a hidden room that Victoria would later claim she knew nothing about, though federal agents were skeptical. The hidden room became the stuff of YouTube legend years later when urban explorers began sneaking onto the abandoned property. It was discovered behind what appeared to be a built-in bookcase in one of the guest house bedrooms. Push on the right side and the entire bookshelf would swing open to reveal a windowless space approximately 10 feet by 12 feet. Inside, investigators found designer clothes still on hangers, leather luggage with the tags still attached, and cash counting machines. Victoria insisted this was just a closet, that the bookshelf door was simply a space-saving design choice. Federal prosecutors disagreed. They believed Carmine Agnello had used this room to count money from his illegal operations, though they never found enough evidence to charge anyone in connection with it. By the time YouTubers discovered it in the 2020s, the room was empty except for dust and the faint smell of expensive cologne that had somehow survived years of abandonment. The mansion's monthly operating costs were staggering. The property tax bill alone was $60,000 per year. Heating and cooling a house that size ran approximately $47,000 annually. Victoria employed a full-time housekeeper, a part-time gardener who came 3 days a week, and a pool maintenance company that charged $3,000 per month during the summer. Insurance was astronomical because of the Gotti name. Security cameras covered every entrance, connected to a monitoring service that cost $1,800 monthly. The total annual cost to maintain the property approached $300,000, and that didn't include mortgage payments. For a family claiming to earn their money through legitimate means, those numbers were difficult to explain, especially when Carmine Agnello's scrap metal business was reporting annual profits that couldn't support that lifestyle, at least not on paper. The money problems started early. In 2001, Carmine Agnello pleaded guilty to federal racketeering charges that included extortion, arson, tax evasion, and operating a stolen car ring through his auto parts stores. The investigation had uncovered a decade-long criminal enterprise. Agnello would send thugs to competitors, offering to buy their businesses. If they refused, buildings would burn. At least 3 suspicious fires were linked to his operation. Stolen luxury vehicles, many of them BMWs and Mercedes, would arrive at his yards where workers would strip them for parts and crush the frames. The VIN numbers were removed and destroyed. Between 1985 and 1999, federal investigators estimated Agnello evaded taxes on more than $10 million in income. On August 16, 2001, standing in a Manhattan courtroom, Agnello pleaded guilty to avoid a trial that would have exposed even more of his operation. The judge sentenced him to 9 years in federal prison and ordered him to forfeit $11 million. Victoria filed for divorce in 2002 while he was still in prison, but the house remained hers. That's where the financial engineering got creative. Public records show Victoria and Carmine purchased the property in 1989 for $175,000. They built the mansion throughout the 90s using money from Carmine's businesses. But in 2005, after their divorce was finalized, Victoria took out a mortgage on the property, not a small mortgage, a $700,000 loan from J.P. Morgan Chase Bank. Real estate experts at the time questioned why she needed such a large mortgage on a property she supposedly owned free and clear. The answer became evident when she immediately defaulted on the payments. Within months of taking out the loan, Victoria stopped making the required $25,000 monthly payments. JP Morgan scheduled a foreclosure auction for the summer of 2005, but Victoria hired lawyers who tied the case up in court for years. She claimed her ex-husband had taken out the mortgage without her knowledge, that his signature had been forged, that she was a victim of his criminal behavior. The courts were skeptical, but the appeals process takes time. Meanwhile, life at the mansion continued in increasingly bizarre fashion. In 2004, Victoria convinced the A&E network to produce a reality show called Growing Up Gotti that would film inside the house and follow her daily life with her three sons, Carmine Jr., John, and Frank, known collectively as the Boys. The show was A&E's attempt to capture lightning in a bottle after The Osbournes became a hit on MTV. The pitch was simple. Cameras would follow Victoria and her three handsome, muscle-bound, gel-haired sons as they navigated life in their Long Island mansion. The Boys were in their late teens and early 20s, and the show would focus on their romantic dramas, their constant conflicts with their overprotective mother, and the challenge of carrying the Gotti name. What A&E got was 41 episodes of the most unintentionally revealing reality television ever produced. A weekly demonstration of what happens when you give cameras to people who desperately want to rehabilitate their image but have no self-awareness whatsoever. Growing Up Gotti premiered on August 2, 2004, and immediately generated controversy. The show portrayed Victoria as a loving mother, struggling to raise three boys as a single parent after her divorce. She constantly referenced her father's imprisonment as a tragedy, as if John Gotti Jr. had been wrongly convicted rather than being a mass murderer who ordered the deaths of at least 19 people. The Boys, meanwhile, came across as entitled, unemployed, and oddly infantilized for men in their 20s. In one episode, Carmine Jr., who was 21 years old at the time, threw a tantrum because his mother refused to buy him a new car. In another, Victoria lectured Frank about getting a job while the cameras panned across their marble foyer and gold chandeliers. The disconnect between their claims of being a normal family and the obvious wealth on display was jarring. Where was the money coming from if Victoria was just a struggling single mother? The show filmed extensively throughout the mansion, giving viewers an intimate look at the property that would later become infamous. Episode after episode featured scenes by the pool, in the grand dining room, in the boys' enormous bedrooms, each decorated with expensive furniture and the latest electronics. The cameras captured Victoria shopping for the boys, buying them designer clothes and jewelry. They showed family dinners where Victoria would cook elaborate Italian meals while wearing designer dresses and full makeup. The boys worked out in their home gym, tanned by their home pool, and threw parties that featured dozens of friends drinking by the water. It was a lifestyle that required enormous amounts of money to maintain, and yet no one on the show appeared to have an actual job. Victoria wrote her books. The boys had vague plans for future careers, but mostly they just existed in this bubble of wealth that had no visible source. Behind the scenes, the financial pressure was building. Victoria's legal battle with JP Morgan continued throughout the filming of Growing Up Gotti. The bank wanted to foreclose. Victoria's lawyers argued she shouldn't be held responsible for a loan her criminal ex-husband had taken out fraudulently. The courts eventually ruled against her. In May 2009, an appeals court cleared the way for JP Morgan to proceed with foreclosure proceedings. The bank argued Victoria hadn't made a single mortgage payment since taking out the $700,000 loan in 2005. They calculated she owed them over $900,000 in principal, interest, and fees. Victoria's legal team scrambled to find a solution. In 2010, they reached a settlement. Victoria would keep the house, but she would have to refinance with a new mortgage and prove she could make the payments. She agreed to the terms. Within months, she defaulted again. This pattern would repeat itself for over a decade. Victoria would stop making mortgage payments. The bank would start foreclosure proceedings. Victoria would hire lawyers who would find technical grounds to delay the process. She would promise to work out a payment plan. The case would drag on for months or years. Then Victoria would default again. Real estate records show at least 4 separate foreclosure attempts between 2005 and 2022. Each time, Victoria found a way to delay the inevitable. She gave interviews claiming she was being persecuted because of her father's name. She argued the government had destroyed her family's finances through vindictive prosecution. She painted herself as a victim struggling to keep her home for her children. What she never adequately explained was why she needed such an enormous mansion in the first place, or why she couldn't afford the mortgage payments when she claimed to be a successful author earning money from her books and television appearances. The truth was more complicated and less flattering. Victoria's books sold modestly, but not enough to support her lifestyle. Growing Up Gotti was canceled after 2 seasons in December 2005 because of poor ratings. The show had generated buzz, but not the sustained audience A&E needed. Victoria's column at the New York Post ended. Her income dropped dramatically while her expenses remained astronomical. The boys, now in their 20s, still lived at home and showed no signs of wanting to leave or contribute financially. And then there was the tax fraud investigation that had been quietly building against her sons for years. Carmine Agnello Jr., John Gotti Agnello, and Frank Gotti Agnello had taken over their father's auto parts business after his release from federal prison in 2008. The business operated in Queens and specialized in selling used auto parts, a continuation of Carmine Sr.'s operation, but supposedly running legitimately this time. Federal investigators didn't believe it. The IRS began examining the business's books in 2014 and discovered what they believed was a pattern of tax fraud. The brothers were allegedly underreporting income, inflating expenses, and using fake invoices to hide profits. The investigation expanded. Federal agents began looking at Victoria herself, wondering if she was involved in laundering money through her book royalties and appearance fees. They started examining her financial records, trying to trace where her money was coming from and where it was going. That's what brought the FBI to 6 Birch Hill Court on September 14, 2016. The raid lasted 9 hours. Agents systematically searched every room in the main house, the guest house, the garage, and even the horse stable. They took boxes of financial records, computers, cell phones, and documents. They photographed everything, creating a detailed record of the property's contents. Neighbors watched the spectacle in shock, though most had suspected something wasn't quite right about the Gotti household for years. The property was too grand, too expensive, and the family was too often in the news for criminal matters. But seeing FBI agents carrying out box after box of evidence made it real. This wasn't just another tabloid story. This was serious. Victoria was not arrested that day. Neither were her sons. The FBI raid was about gathering evidence for potential charges that might come later. But the psychological impact was devastating. Victoria had built her entire adult identity around the idea that she was different from her father and brothers, that she was the respectable Gotti who succeeded through legitimate means. The FBI raid shattered that illusion. News cameras arrived within hours, broadcasting footage of federal agents searching her mansion. The tabloids had a field day. Victoria's carefully constructed narrative of victimhood collapsed under the weight of evidence that she was, at minimum, living in a house purchased with blood money and failing to pay her debts, while maintaining an absurdly lavish lifestyle. The impact on the property was immediate and catastrophic. Victoria left the mansion shortly after the raid and never moved back. Some reports indicate she moved to a rental property in a different part of Long Island. Others claim she stayed with relatives. What's certain is that by early 2017, the mansion at 6 Birch Hill Court sat empty. The mortgage payments stopped completely. The utility bills went unpaid. The lawn maintenance ceased. The pool, which required constant chemical treatment and cleaning, turned green with algae. The tennis court's surface began to crack. Weeds grew through the basketball court. The horse stable's roof started to leak. And inside, the house began its transformation from reality TV palace to ruins. The foreclosure proceeded swiftly this time. With no one living in the property and no mortgage payments being made, JP Chase had clear legal grounds to seize the house. On October 26, 2022, the property was auctioned off as part of the foreclosure proceedings. Real estate auctions for high-end homes typically attract multiple bidders, but this one was different. The Gotti name had become toxic. Potential buyers worried about buying a property with such dark history. Would they be able to resell it? Would their neighbors accept them? Would they become targets for curiosity seekers and true crime fans? The stigma was real, and it depressed the bidding significantly. When the auction ended, JP Chase National Bank emerged as the winner with a bid of $2.65 million. The bank hadn't wanted to own the property. They wanted their money back. But with no other serious bidders, they were forced to take possession. For the next 2 years, the mansion at 6 Birch Hill Court sat in legal and physical limbo. JP Morgan owned it, but had no interest in maintaining it. The bank's goal was to sell the property as quickly as possible and recoup their losses. But finding a buyer proved nearly impossible. They listed it for sale in 2023 at $2.8 million. No offers. They dropped the price to $2.5 million. Still nothing. The house was technically habitable, but years of neglect had taken a toll. The marble floors were dirty. The gold chandeliers were tarnished. The pool was a swamp. The grounds looked like an abandoned park. Most problematic was the reputation. This wasn't just an old house. This was the Gotti house. The mansion where Growing Up Gotti had filmed, the property that had been raided by the FBI, the home of mob royalty. For a certain type of buyer, that history might be appealing. But for most families looking for $1 million home on Long Island, it was disqualifying. That's when the urban explorers arrived. By 2021, word had spread through social media that the Gotti mansion was abandoned and accessible. YouTube channels dedicated to exploring abandoned properties began making pilgrimages to Old Westbury. They would hop the fence at night, avoid the security cameras that no longer worked, and film themselves wandering through the empty house. The videos were surreal. Room after room of expensive furniture covered in dust, clothes still hanging in closets, family photos on the walls, a frozen moment of wealth and dysfunction slowly decaying. The explorers found designer handbags still in the master closet, worth thousands of dollars, just left behind. Kitchen cabinets filled with expensive dishes. The boys' bedrooms still decorated with their childhood sports memorabilia. And behind the bookshelf in the guest house, that mysterious hidden room that launched 100 conspiracy theories. The YouTube videos were viewed millions of times, introducing a new generation to the Gotti family saga. Viewers were fascinated by the excess. 7,000 square feet for one woman and her 3 adult sons, a 3-story guest house that was bigger than most people's primary homes, a pool that cost more than many Americans earn in 5 years. All of it sitting empty, rotting, because the family couldn't afford to maintain it and couldn't bear to part with it. The comments sections filled with debates about wealth, crime, and the American dream. Some viewers sympathized with Victoria, seeing her as a woman trapped by her family's legacy. Others saw her as an accomplice who benefited from criminal profits for decades and was only upset when the money ran out. Both perspectives had merit. In late 2024, JP Morgan Chase finally found a buyer. After multiple price drops and nearly 3 years of trying to sell the property, they accepted an offer of $1.1 million. The buyer's identity has not been publicly revealed, but real estate sources indicate it was a real estate investment company rather than an individual family. They purchased the property with the intention of either renovating and flipping it, or possibly demolishing it entirely and subdividing the 4 acres into smaller lots. The neighborhood would probably prefer the latter. Old Westbury is an exclusive community where residents value privacy and discretion. The Gotti mansion had become a tourist attraction, with true crime fans driving by slowly, taking photos, and occasionally trying to access the property. The YouTube videos only made it worse. A complete demolition would finally put an end to the spectacle. The price tells its own story. The property sold for $1.1 million in late 2024. That's less than half of what JP Morgan paid for it at auction in 2022. It's a fraction of what Victoria and Carmine spent building it in the 90s. Adjusted for inflation, the $175,000 they paid for the land in 1989 would be about $400,000 today. They probably spent another $2 million building and furnishing the house. So the total investment was around $2.4 million in today's dollars. The fact that it sold for less than half that amount shows how completely the Gotti name destroyed the property's value. Any other 7,000 square foot mansion on 4 acres in Old Westbury would sell for $4 or $5 million minimum. This one sold for $1.1 million because of the history, the condition, and the stigma. The tax fraud investigation that prompted the 2016 FBI raid never resulted in federal charges against Victoria or her sons at that time. The Brooklyn U.S. Attorney's Office reportedly concluded there wasn't enough evidence to prove Victoria knew about the tax schemes her sons were allegedly running. As for the sons, sources indicated prosecutors believed they could make a case, but decided the potential sentences wouldn't be worth the resources required to prosecute. Instead, the IRS pursued civil penalties, forcing the brothers to pay back taxes, interest, and fines. The auto parts business eventually closed. Carmine Jr. later got into trouble again, pleading guilty to COVID-19 relief fraud in 2024 after he fraudulently obtained pandemic assistance funds. The pattern of crime in the family continued, just on a smaller, sadder scale. John Gotti Sr. died in federal prison on June 10, 2002, from throat cancer. He was 61 years old and had spent the last decade of his life in solitary confinement at the Supermax facility in Marion, Illinois. He never saw Victoria's mansion in Old Westbury. He never watched Growing Up Gotti. He never witnessed the slow-motion collapse of the family empire he'd built. His wife, Victoria DeGiorgio, inherited what little money remained after the government seized most of his assets. She lived quietly in Queens until her death, avoiding the spotlight entirely. John Gotti Jr., Victoria's brother, spent years fighting federal racketeering charges in the 2000s. Prosecutors tried him 4 times. Each trial ended in a hung jury, with enough jurors refusing to convict that the government eventually gave up. He was released from prison in 2009 and has claimed to be retired from organized crime, though law enforcement remained skeptical. Victoria Gotti continued writing and occasionally appeared on television shows to talk about her father and her family. She never acknowledged that the money supporting her lifestyle came from criminal activity. In interviews about the foreclosure, she blamed the banks, the government, and her ex-husband, but never accepted responsibility for living beyond her means or failing to pay her debts. She maintained that she was the victim, that her father had been wrongly imprisoned, that the Gotti family were Italian-American scapegoats for prejudice and prosecution. It's a narrative that requires ignoring mountains of evidence, dozens of murder victims, and the testimony of former mob members who worked with her father and brother. But consistency was never Victoria's strength. The mansion at 6 Birch Hill Court stands today in an uncertain state. If the new owners chose to renovate it, they'd be looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in repairs and updates. The pool would need to be drained, cleaned, and resurfaced. The mechanical systems would need complete overhauls. Every room would need to be painted. The grounds would need professional landscaping. And even then, they'd be left with a house that looks like a set from The Sopranos, a style that was dated even in 2004. More likely, the property will be demolished. The land alone is worth close to $1 million in that neighborhood. A developer could subdivide it into 2 or 3 lots and build new homes that would sell quickly to buyers who have no interest in mob history. The hidden room in the guest house, the one behind the bookshelf, was never officially explained. Victoria always claimed she didn't know it existed, that Carmine must have built it without telling her. Federal agents believed it was used to count cash from illegal operations, but they never found enough evidence to prove it. Urban explorers who photographed it found nothing except emptiness, and the lingering sense that something dark had happened in that windowless space. Maybe it was just a closet. Maybe it was something more sinister. The truth died with Carmine Agnello's secrets. What makes the story of this mansion so compelling isn't the wealth or the luxury or even the crime. It's the delusion. Victoria Gotti genuinely believed she could build a life separate from her family's criminality while living in a house purchased with blood money. She thought she could be a reality TV star while carrying a name synonymous with murder and racketeering. She imagined she could maintain a multi-million-dollar mansion without legitimate income to support it. At every step, reality tried to intrude, but she pushed it away with lawsuits, media appearances, and an ironclad conviction that she was different, special, exempt from the rules that governed everyone else. The mansion was the physical embodiment of that delusion, a palace built on sand that was always destined to collapse. The neighbors in Old Westbury are relieved it's finally over. For years, they watched the spectacle unfold, the reality TV crews, the FBI raid, the YouTubers hopping the fence at night. Property values in the area suffered because of the attention. One resident told a local news station she was glad the house would likely be torn down because it had become a monument to everything wrong with our society's obsession with criminals. She wasn't wrong. There's something deeply sick about a culture that makes celebrities out of mob bosses and their children, that produces reality shows glamorizing people whose wealth came from extortion and murder. Growing up Gotti was part of that sickness, and the mansion was its stage. If you drive past 6 Birch Hill Court today, you'll see a property in transition. The for sale sign is gone. Security fencing has been erected around the perimeter. No trespassing signs warn urban explorers to stay away. Inside, the fate of the mansion hangs in the balance. Will the new owners renovate and try to strip away the Gotti associations, or will they raze it all and start fresh? As of early 2025, the answer remains unclear. What is clear is that this property will never again be what Victoria Gotti dreamed it would be, a symbol of her legitimacy, her success, her escape from her father's legacy. Instead, it became something far more fitting, a monument to the impossibility of washing blood money clean, a testament to the gravitational pull of a criminal name that drags down everyone who carries it, and a reminder that houses built on corruption will always eventually crumble. The story ends where it began, with federal agents and locked doors and the violent intrusion of reality into carefully constructed fantasies. On that September morning in 2016, when the FBI came crashing through Victoria's front door, they weren't just executing a search warrant. They were demolishing the last illusions that this family could ever truly leave their past behind. The mansion stands today as proof that you can't outrun your history. No matter how many marble floors you install or how many reality shows you film, the Gotti name is poison, and every brick in that old Westbury estate is stained with it. Victoria tried to build a palace. What she created instead was a mausoleum for a family that destroyed itself from within, one bad decision at a time, across 3 generations. That's the real legacy of 6 Birch Hill Court. Not glamour, not power. Just waste, delusion, and the eternal American story of people who thought the rules didn't apply to them learning. Too late that they always did.